All right, today we're tackling a really powerful story from the biblical book of Hosea, and we're going to lean on some insights from Dr. John Oswalt to help us unpack it. It's a story all about a really painful betrayal, but it's met with a mercy that is, well, just completely shocking. So, can a story about adultery really explain the nature of divine love? I mean, that's a pretty intense question, right? But it's exactly what this story is all about. It really pushes us to rethink what we believe about justice and mercy and just how much a relationship can take. To get our heads around this, we first have to understand the core metaphor that the whole story is built on. The relationship between God and Israel here, it's not like some dry legal contract. No, the story paints it as something way more intimate, a marriage.
Dr. Oswald actually calls this a life parable, which I think is a great way to put it. It's like this story is a living, breathing drama. You've got the nation, Israel, playing the part of the mother, the wife. And she's in this covenant marriage with God, who's the husband. And the people living at the time, well, they're the children, and they are stuck right in the middle of this huge family crisis.
And yeah, this marriage is in deep trouble. The wife, Israel, has been unfaithful. She's committed what the book bluntly calls adultery. She's turned her back on her husband to go chase after other lovers.
But what is this betrayal, really? This is where Dr. Oswalt's definition is so helpful. We hear the word idolatry and we think of, bowing to statues, right? But he says it's way deeper than that. It's about trying to grab control of the universe for yourself. It's about trying to bypass God completely to get what you think you need, all on your own terms.
And you can almost hear her thinking it right here in the text. She says she'll go after her lovers. And these lovers, they're the pagan gods of the day, gods like Baal. She actually started to believe that they were the ones providing for her, that they were the source of her food, her water, everything she needed to live.
This really breaks it down perfectly, doesn't it? You've got two totally different ways of seeing the world here. On the one hand, you have a relationship built on trust. You trust God to give you what you need when He decides it's right. But on the other hand, you have this system based on control, almost like magic. It's all about trying to manipulate the world to get what you want, and you want it now.
So what happens when you betray someone like this? What are the consequences? Well, the story is really clear that the punishment isn't just some random thing. Nope, it's a direct result of the betrayal itself. It fits the crime perfectly. Think about it. She gave credit for all her good stuff to the wrong source. So the real source, God, decides it's time for a reality check. And it's going to be a painful one. The very prosperity she was chasing from these other lovers, well, the irony is it's going to lead her to absolute emptiness.
So all those things she thought her lovers were giving her, the grain, the wine, even her festivals and celebrations, they're all going to be taken away. But see, this is more than just a punishment. It's like an unmasking. The whole point is to strip away the illusion and expose the lies she's been telling herself. And you'll notice the word therefore pops up again and again. It's a clue. The writer is drawing a direct line from cause to effect. Because she was unfaithful, therefore her path will be blocked. Because she gave credit elsewhere, therefore her blessings will be taken back. It's all connected. So at this point, you're probably thinking you know how this ends, right? I mean, after a betrayal this deep, the only logical step is divorce, a final, permanent break. But just when you think you've got it figured out, the story hits you with a twist you will not see coming. Okay, so remember that word, therefore? We've seen it link betrayal to punishment every single time. Well, get ready, because we're about to hit the third and final therefore, and this one changes everything. So instead of the divorce we're all expecting, the final punishment, God's response is, what? It's tender love? It's restoration? He says, therefore, I'm going to allure her. I'm going to woo her back. Wow, the goal completely shifts. It's not about punishment now. It's about winning back her heart. And get this, the way he does it is incredible. The consequence actually becomes the cure. The wilderness, that place of hardship and emptiness, it's transformed. It becomes the exact spot where God can finally speak tenderly to her, or, as the original language puts it, speak to her heart. It's the setting for a brand new start. Now this is so important. This isn't just about hitting the reset button and going back to how things used to be. Not at all. This is about building something completely new, something even better, on a foundation that is way, way stronger. God actually says He will betroth her to Himself all over again. It's like a re-engagement.
But this time, the marriage contract is totally different. It's based on the 5 pillars of his own character: rightness, justice, steadfast love, tenderness, and faithfulness. It's a relationship built on who he is, not on what she can do.
And what's the end goal of all this, the big prize? It's not just getting her to obey or making her prosperous again. It's so much more personal. The text says it's so that you will know Yahweh. And like Dr. Oswalt points out, this isn't about knowing facts about someone. This is about knowing them intimately, personally, in a deep relationship.
So when you step back and look at the whole story, it's radical. What it suggests is that even when we fail in the worst possible ways, the final word isn't judgment. It's an active, pursuing, alluring love. A love that doesn't just forgive, but that rebuilds everything on a foundation that's stronger and better than it ever was before.